のかの夜空を行く待ちに待った思いを胸に星の長い今夜だけは止まれ織姫に会いに行く麗しの君よ変わられて見たことない着物黄金色の髪去年まで無口だったあなたは今年は落ちるならば一年ぶり君は変わないね驚いた僕の顔を見て笑うつつましやかだったあなたはどこにいてしまわれたのでしょう
Welcome back to Mangaka Americana. Today we'll be covering Spider-Man, the real Clone Saga, which is basically like a condensed retelling of the Clone Saga story from the 90s. They changed a bunch of details. They condensed it down to 6 chapters. So to quote the back of the book, this is a tale of 2 young men. One was orphaned as a boy, raised by his aunt and uncle, bitten by a radioactive spider and gained amazing arachnid-like abilities. The other was his genetic duplicate. And now, with Peter Parker's life in turmoil, with his Aunt May on her deathbed and his wife, Mary Jane, seemingly pregnant, that mirror image from his past is back. But does Ben Reilly come as a friend, foe, or something even worse? In a story featuring the Jackal, Kane, Dr. Octopus, and more, writers Tom DeFalco and Howard Mackie unite with artist Todd Noack, I can't pronounce that, to tell the controversial tale the way it was originally intended to be told. Okay, so, like I said, this is basically like a retelling of the Clone Saga from the 90s, which, God, if you were around back then, the 90s were a crazy time for comic books. DC had been bought out by Warner Brothers, so because they had corporate backing, they were never going to go broke. Marvel was still an independent company, and they were just really trying to put comic book sales. They tried toys, which was just all over the place. Which we got a lot of cool toys out of the 90s, I'm not going to lie. Except, I don't know why every single action figure had a giant gun with it. Sign of the times, I guess. They tried all kinds of gimmicks. They tried to constantly relaunched their titles with number ones. Venom was affected by this. His actually original series was a series of mini-series. It was always like 1 through 5, 1 through 6, 1 through 3, but it was all one continuous story. But Marvel had the idea of, hey, nothing sells like a number 1. Basically, everything Marvel tried just fed into the comic bus, and most of it backfired. And they actually went bankrupt at one point. Except for Spider-Man. Spider-Man and the X-Men have always sold by and large. Hell, I think at this time Spider-Man had like 5 or 6 different books going on once. It was insane. And so because Spider-Man was doing so well and the book just seemingly couldn't fail, when the Clone Saga came around, which was already a bit of a complicated issue, they just drug it out. And it became silly after a while. But the inside cover says this: previously, ever have an off day? Peter Parker was having an off year. No one ever said the life of a friendly neighborhood web slinger was supposed to be easy, but his had taken a decidedly downward turn. Quite some time ago, Peter witnessed the death of Harry Osborn. To put it quite simply, the 2 men had issues. They were both the best of friends and the most bitter of enemies. Harry's father had been the original Green Goblin, and he held Peter responsible for Norman's death. While still grieving over Harry's passing, Peter suddenly learned that the villain Carnage had escaped the mental institution where he had been incarcerated and had gathered a group of like-minded psychopaths to embark on a killing spree called Maximum Carnage. The worst was still to come. Peter's parents seemingly returned from the dead. Richard and Mary Parker re-entered their son's life shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, claiming to have been recently released political prisoners from behind the old Iron Curtain. Peter and his wife, Mary Jane, couldn't believe their luck. They eventually accepted Richard and Mary into their lives. That's when they learned the truth. Peter's so-called parents were really lifelike robots that had been programmed by the chameleon. However, the real culprit proved to be Harry Osborn, who had allegedly masterminded the entire plot from beyond his grave. As if this wasn't bad enough, Peter's beloved Aunt May suddenly took ill, and then came the so-called highly controversial Clone Saga. If you were there, you know why it was so controversial. If you weren't, it really doesn't matter. All you need to know is that the original Clone Saga was a storyline designed to last a few months, but for various reasons kept getting extended and extended and extended. Some people hate the Clone Saga and claimed it ruined Spider-Man. Others enjoyed parts of the story and missed some of the characters introduced. Almost everyone agrees that it ran on much too long and eventually lost its focus. It did. But at its heart, the Clone Saga was a very simple story. You hold in your hands an attempt to tell the story by a couple of its original authors. So, turn the page and see the way it should have been told. Tom DeFalco. So yeah, basically you have this whole thing between Harry and Peter, which, if you've ever watched the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, they actually execute that pretty good. You got Norman Osborn, he's the Green Goblin, he gets killed by his own glider. Harry learns that his father was the Goblin, creates his own serum, which, he becomes the new Green Goblin, he gets into Peter, Harry eventually dies. The Goblin Serum is much like the Super Soldier Serum. It has never been fully recreated in its original form. People have created variations of it, they've improved upon it, but the original formula was kind of an accident, much like how the Super Soldier Serum, Steve Rogers' physiology was just something peculiar about it, and so it would only properly work on him. But the original Goblin Serum, Norman was really just experimenting with some chemicals. They blew up in his face because, there was a chemical reaction. He inhaled the stuff, and it bonded to his DNA. When Harry, recreated it, it was unstable, and eventually caused him to become sick, and it killed him. So there's a few differences there. Also, he didn't really, while he did go kind of crazy, he didn't develop the multiple personalities that his father did. So, like I said, it was just a really crazy time for Spider-Man. Great story, great dynamics. But yeah, the whole thing was just very convoluted. Of course, we would later learn that Norman Osborn, this is after Harry had died. Turns out Norman didn't die at all. It turns out he had a healing factor. While not as strong as Wolverine's, it was still strong enough for him to fake his own, to, allow people to accept that he died. He left, moved to England, a whole bunch of things. And then he came back later and, I'm still alive. But there's a lot of things in this version of the story that are actually quite different. So basically it opens up, first chapter, Spider-Man's doing his thing. Aunt May's hanging out with Mary Jane. She's talking to some dude named Benjamin. Ooh, who's this guy? Some long-lost relative. She has a heart attack because Aunt May is like 100 years old. And she's always having heart attacks. Peter's rushing to the hospital. He's like, oh no, something's going wrong. There's this dude working at a diner out west. He quits all of a sudden because turns out this mysterious person on a motorcycle was the one talking to Aunt May, this Benjamin character. And turns out his name is Ben Riley. He's like, oh, who's this guy? So Aunt May and Mary Jane are at the hospital, or Aunt May is in a coma again. Peter and Mary Jane are there. They're like, oh no, she's sick. Doctor said, something on the genetic level, so we don't know what it is. Mary Jane's getting sick. She's like, oh my god, I'm just really nervous. Peter decides he's got to go save the day because there's some Spider-Man stuff going on. Mary Jane's worried that something might be wrong with her. You see this mysterious dude with, long brown hair and a dark costume hiding out in the shadows. He kind of sets off Peter's spider sense, but he's like, oh, well, it's just my nerves. I'm real stressed out. It's nothing. Mary Jane goes to the doctor. Oh, turns out she's pregnant. What a surprise. Which is, again, something that happened in the original Clone Saga. Spider-Man's doing his thing, and then you see another dude who kind of looks like Peter from the back. He rushes into the hospital. He sees Aunt May, and you kind of are led to believe that, the nurse's like, oh, yeah, I thought you left, or whatever. He's like, she's like, look, there's that Spider-Man guy out the window. Yeah, Jameson says he's a real menace. And this guy's like, oh man, I can't let him see me. So he rushes out to the roof, and this guy who looks like Peter Parker runs into Spider-Man. Like, it's you. Turns out, there's a big misunderstanding. They're fighting a little bit. Turns out, he's like, hey man, I'm the clone you thought you got rid of. Whenever, I died in that fight, you dropped me in the smokestack. Turns out I was really just in a coma. And the fall kind of like revived me or whatever. He's like, no, it can't be you. It's some trick. A car comes flying out of nowhere, because of course it does. It blows up some stuff. They team up to save the day. They save some civilians. This other guy, this other Peter, Ben Reilly, he puts on his own Spider-Man mask, and everything's cool. And you see this dude creeping out in the shadow. It turns out he threw the car. Oh no. Who's this mysterious guy? There's some green stuff that's exploding everywhere. They're getting trapped by it. They kind of get rid of it. They save each other. Of course, this mysterious dude who we learn is called Kane. He's talking to somebody. He's like, yeah, it turns out they set up this whole thing just so that the two Spider-Men, Peter and Ben, would bond together. They'd like be cool or whatever. Of course, you see this mysterious figure in some secret base somewhere. He's like, yes, haha, everything's going according to plan. Oh, I'm so clever. Later on, Ben Reilly, this is the second chapter, Ben Reilly has made himself a new costume. It's called the Scarlet Spider. It's this red Spider-Man outfit without the webs or whatever. He's got like this blue hoodie on. Very 90s. He's fighting with Kane. Kane's like, oh, yes, I'm so mysterious. Blah, 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 blah. Ben shooting out these little stinger things he made out of webbing because he's making all kinds of stuff or whatever. Kane escapes. Ben Reilly goes to his job at the Daily Grind, which is this coffee shop. Of course, Ben has dyed his hair blonde, so no one thinks he's Peter Parker because, two guys who look exactly the same but different hair colors, we're never going to figure that out because, we're idiots. He's having some friendly banter. Aunt May's still sick. Mary Jane collapses. Oh, no. Oh, I'm pregnant. So they run some tests on her. Turns out she's having the same genetic problem as Aunt May. So clearly it's not Aunt May just having a heart attack again. You see this mysterious dude called Kane. He's got this big black outfit on. You don't see any of his features. You just know he has long brown hair. And he starts having premonitions. Like a full-blown That's So Raven vision of Mary Jane in the hospital. He's like, oh my god, no. Whoa. He calls the dude he's working with, our mysterious figure. He's like, oh, well, I decided it would be better to infect both the wife and the to give them a little more incentive. Ooh, I'm so evil. Kane gets pissed off. He hits a wall. They're in the hospital. Peter and Ben hook up. It's like, hey, let's go do some Spider-Man stuff. They're doing some Spider-Man stuff. They fight Kane. Kane's like, I'm here to help you guys. No, you're not. He's like, well, your wife and Anne are sick. I'm trying to help you. Why don't you just follow me to this, obvious evil secret base? We'll go there. And so, okay, he's clearly leading these guys into a trap with the guy he's working with. Some black goop stuff trapped some. Kane frees him or whatever. He shocks the stuff. They go in there. There's all these cloning pods. Oh, there's the Jackal, the guy who originally created Ben Reilly, the guy who cloned Spider-Man. He's like, oh, yes, I've got this evil plan. Oh, here's some gas. But the gas won't affect me, knock me out, because it's only attuned to Peter Parker's DNA. So Peter and Ben are both, falling unconscious, but so is Kane. Oh my god, that means Kane must be another clone. Oh my god. Turns out here's the Jackal's evil plan. Ooh, he's creating a clone army of Spider-Man. But he needs Ben's DNA, his blood sample, as a stabilizing agent because all the other clones before him broke down. And turns out Kane was one of those clones, except he didn't fully break down. He was just having a disease that slowly, it was a genetic disorder that was causing him to slowly break down over time, which had the side effect of augmenting his spider powers. He has a bigger build than Peter and Ben. He is stronger. He's more agile. His spider sense, rather than being like reactionary, it's like full-blown premonitions, which is why he can see into the future sometimes. His adhesive abilities are so strong to where when he kills somebody, he will press his hand against their face, burning this mark into their face called the Mark of Cain before killing them. So you got all these clones or whatever. The Jackal's like, oh, I'm going to take over the world. Blah, 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 blah. You got all these clones, but their minds aren't programmed, so they're kind of like empty husk or whatever. The Jackal's messing with their heads. He's like, oh, yes, haha, I'm so evil. You see Kane, he's got like all these web-like scars all over his body because, he's breaking down slowly. The Jackal, not only is he going to, create a Clear Man, he is also creating a clone of Gwen Stacy, a new clone, because there was an original clone that kind of like left or whatever way back in the day. Because the Jackal was a professor at Empire State University, so he was Peter and Gwen Stacy's teacher, and he was like in love with Gwen Stacy. And he went crazy. He was a pervert. It was the 70s. It was a crazy time. And so he's like, yes, Gwen, my dear, I shall bring you back to life because, I don't know, I got some weird fucking obsession with you. Kane breaks out. He's like, no, you won't disrespect her memory because up to the point of being created, Kane and Ben have the same memories as Peter, again, up to a point. So they're both in love with Gwen Stacy. Because Gwen Stacy, in case you didn't know, was Peter Parker's first real love. Of course, she died at the hands of the Green Goblin. He's like, no, blah, 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 blah. I won't let you do this, you weirdo. So they fight all the army of Spider-Man or whatever. Kane, Peter, and Ben, they all team up. Of course, the clones are breaking down because they aren't genetically stable. Turns out, and the Jackal's like, hold on, I use Ben Reilly's blood, which is the stabilizing agent for my serum, because he's the only fully stable clone. So the Jackal comes to the conclusion, oh my god, I got it backwards. Ben Reilly isn't the clone. Peter Parker is. Oh my god. He's like, I'll just have to kill you guys and start again. Kane's like, no, I got a perfect solution. He burns the mark of Kane into his face, breaks his neck. He's like, yeah, take that, you weirdo. He's like, yeah, here's like this cure to this disease your wife and aunt have. Here, you can try to stop me because I just killed this guy, or you can take this cure. So he throws the cure, runs off, they catch it. The whole building explodes, So they get to the hospital in time, they save Aunt May and Mary Jane, they give him the cure. Ben's like, hey, I'm that Ben Reilly guy you've been talking about, that long-lost relative that you just never met somehow. Of course, Aunt May, at this time in the comic, she was portrayed as being like very naive and she was, Marvel, like a side note here, Marvel has a sliding timeline, okay? Unlike DC, which reboots about every 20 years, Marvel, the first 10 years in publication happen in real time, and then everything else happens within another 10 years. Which is why Marvel oftentimes avoids using hard dates to avoid any kind of confusion. It allows them to age their characters very slowly. It also causes problems. But of course, when the books were originally being published, Aunt May, this is like back in the 60s when Spider-Man first came out, she was already like 80 years old. So this woman had been around since like the early 1900s. And so she had that very naive, I just don't understand the crazy ways of the world. And so she was always portrayed as being easily deceived or whatever, which thankfully in recent years in the books, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she's a lot more hip to the game, so to speak. You're not going to pull a fast one on her, which really helps her character out. But anyway, she's like, oh yes, you're that nice young man I've been talking to. Oh, sure, whatever, I believe anything you say. Please, scam me out of my retirement fund. But anyway, so everything's cool, whatever. Peter's like, hey man, I'm having a baby. I can't be doing this crazy Spider-Man stuff anymore. So how about you just take over? So Ben Reilly puts on the costume. He's officially Spider-Man now. He's not the Scarlet Spider anymore. And so Peter retires. Of course, you got Kane in the background talking to this mysterious partner, which at first we thought was the Jackal. It turns out they weren't working together. But whoever this guy is, he's talking to him. He's like, yes, everything's going according to plan. Blah, 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 blah. And of course, it turns out this guy has a cloning pod wherever he is. And we see him, but we don't really see him. And it looks like, okay, it's Norman Osborn. Because in the original version of the story, the 616 main continuity version, again, Norman Osborn didn't actually die, and he came back later on. Turns out he was like screwing with Peter or whatever. And so that's okay. That seems like who it is, but he still has a bunch of shadow around him. And of course, next chapter, Ben Reilly has his new version of the Spider-Man costume, which just looks dope as hell. He's fighting Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock notices, like, hey, there's something different about you or whatever. You're not fighting like you usually do. Spider-Man kind of like jokes. He just, writes it off or whatever. Octopus is still in like all kinds of tech and stuff or whatever, just doing mad scientist stuff. Spider-Man saves the day. Doc Ock gets away or whatever. Peter's at home with Mary Jane. He's stressing about stuff because, he's got a baby on the way. Ben Reilly shows up at his work. His boss, tries to hook him up with some chick because, he's like, she's like, you need to get a life and you should talk to this really nice girl. Okay, whatever. Kane hooks up with Dr. Octopus. And he, makes a joke, and Doc Ock's like, man, you sure we haven't met before? He's like, yeah, I'm pretty positive. Well, because Kane may be, some defective clone, but he is still Peter Parker. He still has that same mannerisms, those jokes, that humor. And so he's basically making a deal with Dr. Octopus. He gave him all the Jackal's notes and stuff like that. It's like, hey, you steal all this tech, we can use this cloning technology to keep you alive forever. Sounds pretty good. And so Ben Reilly goes on a date. It was okay, but he's thinking about some chick he dated one time. Not important. He goes out being Spider-Man. Peter's so stressed. And of course, he ends up running into Doc Ock again. They fight a bit. He ends up getting away because he's like, man, I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm not the original, or I'm not, the guy he's been fighting all these years. They've got a routine now, so I need to catch up. And so Doc Ock and Kane, they're hanging out in the evil lair or whatever. And of course, they kind of the whole deal falls apart. Once Kane gets what he wants, Doc Ock runs his mouth. Kane beats him up. He's like, yes, I do owe you, so I'll grant you a mercy. I'll snap your neck before I give you the mark of Cain. Here comes Spider-Man, Ben Reilly. They make some jokes. They fight. They're going back and forth. And, of course, he shoots some web at Cain, but Cain throws Doc Ock in front of himself. It seals off his mouth and his nose, or he's going to suffocate. He's like, hey, man, you can try to stop me as I get away with this, evil device or whatever. Or you can save this guy. Because if you come after me, he's going to suffocate. It's kind of your fault. So he gets away. Ben tears all the webbing off Doc Ock's face. He's like, oh, why'd you save me? He's like, isn't it obvious? I'm Spider-Man. Which, it's reaffirming that, hey, whether I'm the clone or I'm the original, it doesn't matter. I wear the suit. I'm out doing the superhero stuff. So I am Spider-Man. Of course, Kane's on a rooftop. He's talking to this mysterious dude. He's like, yes, I have all the stuff. We can actually revive anyone we desire without fear of degeneration. And then you see the mysterious benefactor again. He's like, yes, I know exactly the person I wish to revive. And it turns out the person that was in the cloning pod was Norman Osborn. Okay, we thought this guy was Norman Osborn. So how can this be? So it's like, okay, this is a bit confusing. So Norman actually is dead in this version of the story. Of course, next chapter, Ben and Peter are trying to put this whole crib and baby stuff together. Mary Jane goes into labor. They both go there. Oh, Kane shows up. He's causing havoc in the middle of the street or whatever. They team up to stop him. They fight a bit. Kane gets away because, of course, he does. Peter gets into the hospital just in time. And, the nurse or whatever, she takes the baby. Oh, turns out she didn't actually work for the hospital. She wasn't a real nurse. Because apparently we don't run background checks, to see if, hey, maybe this person isn't a licensed medical professional. Maybe they're just a baby snatcher. But, whatever. Why in the world would we do that? Peter and MJ are obviously distraught. They're pissed off. This lady meets up with Kane. She gives Kane the baby. Of course, then he's talking to this mysterious dude. He's like, yeah, I've got the baby. It's a girl. He goes, oh, that's cool. But, anything goes wrong, you got to kill her. She's like our insurance policy. So this baby, which is named after Aunt May, it's Peter and Mary Jane's daughter. They got the baby kidnapped or whatever, which is an interesting thing. It's an interesting difference between this and the original story. In the original, they came to full term and they had the baby, but marriage, it was a stillbirth. But then later on, it was said that the child lived and that it's going to show back up, but we've never seen it. It's one of those inconsistencies that Marvel had that they've never really tried to resolve. So, it's just one of those things. Because you see in the original story, like I said, the baby, was stillborn or whatever, or it lived and then disappeared. I don't know. There was a what if, like what if the baby had lived, and this created an entire separate continuity called Marvel Comics 2, and the baby would grow up and become Spider-Girl. Like I said, it was, I don't know, it was just a dumb thing. I personally think the baby they just kept the baby in continuity, but Marvel doesn't need they don't know how to leave well enough alone. But you see Kane's like kind of conflicted because it's a real Darth Vader moment. I say a Darth Vader moment because Vader, you cannot see his face past his mask. But when he's in the films or in the books, you can tell whenever he's feeling some kind of emotion without seeing his face, just because of the context of the situation, his body language, stuff like that. And you can't see Kane's face because of his mask, but you can tell he's having this great struggle. Well, this mysterious guy, wakes up the Norman Osborn clone, gives him his old Goblin outfit. Ben Reilly's out being Spider-Man, a few days later or whatever. Green Goblin dies. Like, oh, you can't be the real Green Goblin. No, Harry's dead. Norman's dead. You're just some cop a bit. And he ends up stabbing Ben with his glider, which in the original story, which it was the real Norman Osborn who is still alive, Ben ends up jumping the way of Peter, who the Goblin was coming after, ends up getting stabbed, and he dies in Peter's arms. When he does, he degenerates, proving once and for all that Peter was the original. So at first we're thinking, if you've ever read the original story, you see this, like, oh my god, like, they're killing him off just like in the original. Well, you go back to this, like, secret hideout, turns out Ben's not dead, and the Goblin's like, hey man, when I stabbed you, it wasn't any major organs because I need you alive. So he's like torturing him and whatever, right? And he's beating him up. Peter obviously is still looking for the baby. Ben's disappeared. Tracks Ben down because, he goes to the Jackal's old hideout. That's what he does. Of course, he's not finding anything there. And the Goblin takes his mask off. Oh, it's really Harry Osborn. He was the mysterious partner behind Kane the entire time. Oh my god. It turns out he never died in this story. Oh my god. And so, it turns out, it's just part of his whole evil plot. And then elsewhere, you see Norman, or the Norman Osborn clone standing with Kane. He's like, my son stole this baby. Why? Why does an innocent child how does an innocent child figure into his plans? Kane says he wants Peter Parker to suffer as much as possible. Harry started by making him doubt his very identity and won't stop until Parker has lost everything. Norman says, does he intend to kill this child? Kane says, no, that's my job. Somehow Harry learned about me. He knew I was jealous of Ben and resented being a defective copy of Peter. He played on my emotions and convinced me to use the cloning technology to bring back the Jackal. Which, pause. The Jackal has been cloned so many damn times, usually by himself, and it's always like, haha, I was the original the entire time, and I was just operating via proxy through a clone. But then that one dies, and turns out, in the background, haha, I'm the real Miles Warren, and that was a clone. So we don't know who the real Miles Warren is. We don't know who the real Jackal is. He could be a clone. He could be original. It really doesn't matter, because he's a character that has just outworn his stay in Marvel Comics, in my opinion. The last story I read about him was Spider Island, and that was just that was another mess. But that's a story for another time. He's like, I brought back the Jackal and you. It was me. He's like, so I'm not the real Norman Osborn. Afraid not, sir. He goes, tell me more. And of course, Harry. We go back to Harry beating up Ben because he's chained up and stuff. Harry shoots out this little goblin firework through his glove, attracts Peter's attention. He goes to the old Oscorp building. And Harry's, you see this Norman clone. He's like, the details, he's like, Spider-Man deserves to be punished. I assume he's the one who murdered me. Kane says, way I heard it, one of your plans backfired. You kind of died at your own hands. The details don't matter. Spider-Man is still to blame, and Harry has a responsibility to avenge me. If I drilled one lesson in that boy's thick skull, it's the importance of family. Kane's like, yeah, family. He's standing there with his arm crossed, looking all nuanced. Me, I never really had one. Not until I finally got to know Peter and Ben over these past few months. I can't express how much I used to hate those guys. Or hate those two. How much I wanted them to suffer. Something inside me changed when I first held my niece. She's family, Norman. Should she pay for the sins of her father? Should any child? Norman looks at the baby. He's kind of like, he's kind of thinking to himself. Spider-Man shows up, or Peter shows up. Ben's all chained. He's like strung up or whatever. He's moving around. Turns out Harry attacks him. I was like, oh my God, Harry, you're alive. And of course, you get this another exchange between the Norman Osborn clone and Kane. And Kane says, is this war between the Parkers and the Osborns destined to go on forever? Norman says, no, it ends tonight. Kane says, what about the child? Kane, you already know what must be done. And so we're led to believe, like, okay, when the time comes, Kane's going to kill the baby. And of course, Harry's fighting Peter. He's like, oh man, you're so stupid. You thought I somehow masterminded a whole bunch of stuff from beyond the grave. Man, I was alive the entire time. You're a big idiot. I'm not a clone. I am the original. Or I'm not actually Harry Osborn. I never actually died. And it turns out Ben Reilly was the clone. You're the original. Why would I waste all my time and resources, on like a copy of you? It's like, I engineered this whole thing because I'm just so evil and I'm mad. And, you took away my dad because, I don't know, my dad was kind of an asshole, and I just don't want to accept that. Here comes Norman. He's wearing his outfit. He's got his own glider. He blasts Harry with a little blast from his glove. So Ben and Peter team up with Norman, and Norman's, Harry's like, why, Dad? Why are you doing this? He's like, you may have created me, Harry, but that's because I made you a monster. You have been living with my sins your entire life. The time has finally come to end the cycle of violence. He's like, no, oh God, I'm just going to kill you and clone you again because you're probably defective, and I'm going to make you better because, I don't know, I'm hung up on my daddy issues or whatever. And so, they're all fighting, everyone's like kung fu fighting. It's just ridiculous. Bombs are going off everywhere. There's some webbing. There's some razor bats. And of course, Harry's like, I got one ace in the hole because Kane's going to kill your baby, Peter. And he's going to kill Aunt May and Mary Jane. Ha ha, I win again because I'm so clever. And of course, they're like, they're at the hospital. It's like, what's keeping Peter waiting? Mary Jane's like, why isn't he called? Aunt May says, I'm sure he's doing his best, Mary Jane. Kane shows up in the window. He is. You're the one called Kane. I recognize you from Peter's description. Did you take my daughter? Why are you here? What do you want? To finish what I started. Oh my God, he's going to kill everybody. Back at the Oscorp building, bombs are going off, everything's going, they're fighting, blah, 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 blah. Harry orders his glider to come stab Peter. He's like, yeah, I have the cloning technology. If need be, I can come back again and again. But the real Peter Parker only has one life, and he's about to die. Ha ha! But then Norman, the Norman Osborn clone, he jumps in the way. He's like, no! He ends up getting stabbed instead. Harry's like, oh my God, Dad, why'd you do it? He goes, why did you save him? We could have won. He's like, I did it for you, son. You need to stop wasting your life and end the cycle of it. He starts breaking down because he's a clone or whatever. He's like, don't worry, Dad. I'll bring you back and we'll find a way to win. And blah 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 blah. Peter's like, where's my daughter, Harry? We'll find her, Pete. I promise you. She's going to be just fine. Back at the hospital, turns out Kane didn't kill the baby. Kane, when Norman said, Kane, you know what to do, he wasn't referring to killing the baby because when Kane gave his big speech about family or whatever, how something inside of him had changed when he held his niece, it actually changed Norman's mind too. And he's like, hey man, by, you know what to do, it means do the right thing, return the baby. Mary Jane's like, how can I ever thank you for rescuing my daughter? It's the least I could do. Please give my regards to Peter and Ben and tell them that Kane will never trouble them again. Aunt May's like, wait, I don't understand any of this because I'm so old. but there is something very familiar about you, young man. Do I know you? No, ma'am. And that's my loss. Because again, he still has a bunch of Peter Parker's memories. So he remembers being raised by Aunt May. But those memories aren't his. And so he doesn't have that actual relationship with the woman. 2 weeks later, they're all hanging out. They got the baby. Everything's cool. You're like, yeah, we don't know where Kane is. Yeah, Harry's still locked up in the crazy house or whatever. So who's the clone? Who's the original? I don't know. They're both liars. Harry's a liar. That Jack was a liar. We don't know what Kane's about. He's just, I don't know. He's having a big identity crisis because, it's the 90s and everyone in the 90s was still a teenager for like 10 years. So, well, everything's all's well that ends well. Ben Reilly hops up on his motorcycle. He drives out of town. It's like, think we'll ever see him again? Trust me, Mary Jane. We haven't seen the last of Ben Reilly or the Scarlet Spider. The end for now. So I guess they plan on trying to maybe make a series out of this, and it just didn't happen. Like I said, the Clone Saga, it was what it was. It was a big mess. But it's one of those things where it was a beautiful mess. It's much like Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which, oh my god, as we all know, was the greatest cinematic masterpiece ever. But in all seriousness, that film was a mess too. But it's one of those messes to where you look back in hindsight, it was faulty, it was flawed, but you can't help but love it. And that's how I feel about the original Clone Saga. Despite all of its convoluted nonsense and all of its ridiculous plot threads, and it's, oh my god, who's the clone? Who's the original? Maybe everyone's a clone. I don't know. It was a good story. Everyone loves Ben Reilly. I think Kane was a cool-ass villain. You also got Spider-Side, who kind of sucked, but, whatever. He was another clone. And it was... thing of note, in the original story, Doc Ock actually died. Kane did kill him. He didn't get rescued by Ben Reilly. And he ended up, transferring his mind to a clone body because he backed up his mind at one point. But then in between that, there's a student of his, some chick who became Dr. Octopus. I don't know. It was dumb. I think another difference was whenever in the original story, when Ben Reilly became Spider-Man, he bonded to the Carnage symbiote at one point, became Spider Carnage. Peter lost his powers temporarily. Ben Reilly ends up getting into a relationship with this one chick. Turns out this chick was the daughter of the guy who killed Uncle Ben, so that was some big conflict they had. It was the Lizard went through some weird mutation where he had a fin on his back. You had the Planet of the Symbiote story around this time, which really helped to evolve the Venom character. Like I said, there's a lot of cool stuff that happened during the Clone Saga. But it was a mess. It's always been a mess. It's always going to be a mess. But I don't regret it. But this story, I think, if you don't want to take the time to read the original Clone Saga and you kind of just, want, a different take on a good... This story is just, one big what if. It's hey, what if the Clone Saga wasn't an unorganized, unthought-out mess? Much like the Star Wars sequel trilogy by Disney. If you want to see, hey, what could have been with the Clone Saga, it's a good little book. I wouldn't buy it. See, the original cover price is $19.99, United States. I would not pay $20 for this. But if you go to, your local comic shop and you find in, the used section, or if you get on, eBay or Amazon, you find, dirt cheap, and you got the money to blow, go ahead and pick it up. It's a nice little thing to collect. Read it once or twice, throw on your bookshelf, give it to your kids whenever, you get too old for it. But yeah, it's a fun story. Spider-Man, the Real Clone Saga, get it cheap, read it. And see you guys next time. Peace.